All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us for that flashback to CryptoPsychedelic 2018. Chime in the chat on the side if you're back with us and we're coming through correctly. Remind us where you're tuning in from, because now we're live. We're back with 5 of our speakers from the original 2018 conference, of our crypto experts here, and they're here to answer your questions. So the way, if you want to ask a question here in Crowdcast, you'll see right below this video, there's the Ask a Question feature. And that's where you want to type in what you want to ask these folks. You can also up or down vote the best questions that they'll be able to answer for you. So with that, I'm gonna take myself off the screen from now, and I'm gonna hand things off to Shannon to moderate this interactive Q&A session. So Shannon, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike. We're so happy to be back. It was so fun watching the content today and getting to see old friends and remembering what it was like to gather in person in Tulum, which I personally would love to have done again this year. But happy to be with you. These are some of my favorite humans in crypto, and really happy to be here and introduce each one of you. So I'm going to go around my screen, and we'll start with Max Borders, who is a writer, a speaker, an innovator. Max, you want to talk a little bit about what you've been up to recently?
I've been doing nothing but writing books lately. I love writing, and that's what I've been doing. And then during a pandemic, writing is something that is near and dear to my heart, so it allowed me to be super indulgent.
Awesome. And the book is called, it's recently out, and everyone should grab a copy.
Yeah, the latest book is called After Collapse, where I portend the end of the American experiment, but also the rebirth of her ideals.
Awesome. Can't wait to dig into that more. Vinay, welcome back. We're so happy to have you joining us from London. Thanks for coming in late on a Sunday evening. You've been working on all sorts of things lately. I'll let you give us a little intro.
Sure. So I am days, maybe 2 weeks away from releasing a set of NFTs which are directly tied to valuable physical objects in vaults. Some of them in gold vaults, some of them storage for collectibles. And I'm also working very hard on a bunch of stuff about addressing the horrific carbon footprint of NFTs and of the blockchain in general. So there'll be a bunch of news about that. So I'm at that late stage where I've been in 2 more weeks mode for about a month, but now it really is 2 more weeks.
That's awesome. Looking forward to hearing more. Mr.
I was going to say 2 more weeks after 4 years. Let me tell you, it's a good feeling.
Finally almost there. Mr. Lachance, the Doge Sir, the DDP master, someone that hopefully a lot of people in the audience have already or will have a chance to dance with decentrally in the future. Tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting year, so I'm sure it has for everyone else. We started doing virtual parties and then realized pretty quick that we could link them back to the real world. Everyone on the Zoom call could be out in the world with a boombox or a giant soundbox speaker, and we realized that was the key to cracking the code on creating giant synchronized global dance parties, which has always been the dream. And the last few months, been working on finally releasing our peace bonds NFTs, which is the opposite of war bonds. Governments used to raise money by selling war bonds to fight wars. We're going to sell peace bonds to wage peace on a global scale. And yeah, it's been very exciting to see the NFT scene exploding and all the ramifications of that. So many new people entering the space. So exciting times. And of course, all-time highs for the Doge.
Which is always exciting.
Elon tweeting daily.
Riffing on the NFT emergence in the last few weeks in just a second. Jake, you've been working on all sorts of fun things recently. I actually don't even know what's new in your world. I'm excited to hear about it.
Well, I have still been working on, primarily been working on native, building the second version of a platform for any sort of creator or municipality or company to launch their own currency and loyalty program to go along with it. We should be live with that version in June, and very much we have an awesome test client that is actually a very large rolling papers company. And I'm very excited it blends with what we're talking about here today very well, because they have a new process for infusing papers that have interesting effects. And I'm very excited for that launch. Besides that, I have just been drawing a lot and trying to take this time and space to, I don't know, to just develop myself personally and prepare for this next wave of crypto growth, which seems to be like about to explode.
It's been an interesting couple of years. I was watching the content today and listening to all of the talk that, in the beginning of 2018, there was so much movement around ICOs, which obviously have gone quite down in terms of popularity. They're still happening, but it's much quieter than it used to be. And there's so much that's come out in terms of psychedelics in the mainstream conversation. We have people giving, take this, not that, coming from some really mainstream players. So it's been an interesting update in the last couple of years. I personally just got done helping produce ETH Denver, which we were really excited to move into the virtual space. We were expecting 3,000 to 5,000 people to join us. We had 31,000. So if that says anything about how much people are really hungry for content and connection and wanting to know what's going on, that was a big signal. So stoked to be here with you guys and really curious. One of the things that I was thinking as I was watching the content was just really wondering, what were some of the things that you didn't see coming that you're really excited about now? Like, what has emerged that you wouldn't have been able to predict? And Vinay, I had you in mind when I was first thinking of this question.
So where we are is we're jumping into the real world, but from an angle that nobody ever expected. Nobody really understood that the NFT was going to be the thing that actually brought in the masses. It's kind of this electrical moment where we've finally done something with crypto that doesn't require people to completely rebuild their mental models from scratch to work with it. If you explain Bitcoin, you wind up talking about central banking, and you start talking about the nature of the nation state, and you wind up with a really, really complicated thing that has to happen before people can have the aha moment and be like, oh, you mean I use this to pay for things? We just haven't had something that was just like, oh yeah, there you go. And now we've got this thing where, here's the NBA project, and you buy the thing, you sell the thing, it's your thing, kind of, sort of. So yeah, I'm just super surprised that NFTs turned out to be the thing that seemed to be the likely breakthrough into the real world.
And for those of the viewers that don't know, can you explain a little bit about the NBA project?
Sure. So I guess I would say one sentence about what an NFT is. So an NFT is basically a transferable right to a digital asset, where the digital asset is typically a piece of art. So it's a photograph, or it could be a piece of music, but it's pretty much like just being able to assert some kind of ownership right over a file. And the critical thing, that it's your property in exactly the same way that your Bitcoin is your Bitcoin. If you own the key, it's your thing. Ideally, there is some subversion of that, but generally speaking, you own the key, it's your thing. So for such a radical technology to have the NBA licensing clips of great moments from previous games, so that you can buy that 10-second clip and you're the person that owns that 10-second clip of some spectacular event. There just isn't a bigger IP brand other than Disney, right? You're at the absolute top of the tree there, and they're making money hand over fist doing this thing, which takes a whole bunch of footage that they were not currently monetizing effectively and makes it valuable. So every major brand that has any kind of IP library right now is beating its way to the blockchain to try and replicate this success. It is a gigantic thing.
And what does it mean for me to own 10 minutes of an NBA game? What do I do with that?
Well, so the clips are real short. They're like the length of an animated GIF. They're the kind of thing that you might drop into a chat channel. Right now, there's not a whole ton you can do with them, other than it's yours and you own it and other people don't. People are buying and selling them. But the rational expectation is that an ecosystem will build itself out around this. And my expectation is that brands like Facebook will wind up with things like memes or emoticons or similar things, which if you don't own the NFT, you can't drop that into a chat because it's not your thing to say. So I don't think it's so much that this is the final rendering of the entire ecosystem, but it's the first time a big brand has said, okay, what can we do with our back catalog? And they can continue to add features and capabilities and new models of engagement with these things pretty much as fast as they can develop the software. So I don't think of this as being like, okay, that's all it does. This is what they did on day one. That's their hello world. And then around that, they're going to build we don't know what yet.
Well, and you touched earlier on the carbon footprint of NFTs. Can we already have an audience member asking for you to expand on that?
Sure. So the carbon footprint of the Ethereum blockchain would cost about $50 million a year carbon offsets to manage. Right? If we were going to take Ethereum carbon neutral, we'd have to spend about $50 million a year. Frankly, for a $200 billion ecosystem, spending $50 million a year to go carbon neutral seems like a no-brainer, but right now it's hard to figure out where that money would come from. So the blockchain that the NBA are using is I want to say modified proof of stake blockchain. So the carbon emissions for these things are probably about the same as for credit card transactions. By no means perfect, but nothing like 50 million a year of offsetting required. I cannot wait for the blockchain world to move to proof of stake, because it's a real pain for me. Just like, come on, I'm an environmentalist, and I know that every time I tell my tech guys to upload a new version of the smart contract, I can basically just hear the sky howling. So the faster we can get to the bottom of this and start either offsetting everything or working on proof of stake systems, the better. And Ethereum 2 is coming.
That's awesome. Gary, you've been doing really interesting things with NFTs. Tell us a little.
So, yeah, we've had this idea to create peace bonds ever since 2014, where the idea was to do a unique crowdfunding project. But basically, the idea is to offer $1 million worth of peace bonds to bring everything together required to wage peace on a global scale. So that's finalizing our documentary, releasing the DDP field manual, and activating as many people as possible globally. And then the idea is, once we've successfully done that and united the world, won the Nobel Peace Prize, which is about $1 million, everyone gets paid back. So it's a very funny, unique way to crowdfund a Nobel Prize bid. And the NFTs will also serve as tickets to the virtual movie premiere. And it's pretty much unlimited what you can do with any NFT. It can be voting rights within a DAO. They can receive airdrops, so it can be like any sort of loyalty program where you can gift people within your community. You could use it to create universal basic income schemes. And the sky is really the limit, and super exciting to see. Like, cryptocurrencies were cool and interesting, but this is a way that anyone creative in the world can get on board with this technology and start experimenting and benefiting. And you're seeing early artists that have come on doing very well within the space. And it's like watching the dawn of crypto all over again. I've spent the last couple months just researching as much as I could, meeting all the people involved in the scene, learning about the tech, which is still definitely super limited, but it's definitely going to change everything forever. Very excited about it.
Jake, Gary just said something interesting about it being the dawn of crypto again. And that was something that you kind of touched on in terms of how early we were. Even back in 2018, I think some of us thought we were a little bit closer to adoption than it turned out that we were. What do you think about what we're seeing today?
In terms of cryptocurrency adoption in general, I mean, over the past couple of months, we've seen JP Morgan, Citibank, both saying that people should start allocating 1% or more of their portfolios into cryptocurrency. Ray Dalio has given a positive message about Bitcoin. But I see that as cryptocurrency. Tesla bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin recently, and we're starting to see new companies buy Bitcoin and Ethereum to have in their treasuries just as a sort of just as a hedge against cash, basically. And it's the pace at which it's picking up is crazy. And I get calls from friends every day now, just asking me to help them set up the accounts. Which things should I buy? And along that, and kind of on the NFT fronts, specifically too, I've started to get calls from artist friends who, who make paintings, who are, kind of more traditional art world people who are just now starting to get into, who are like just learning about what an NFT is at a very basic level. And so, I'm grateful to have such a, deep background in this space in general, that I can give them a lot of different ideas and formats of like how they can use the technology to make something that's truly unique, truly, rather than just having a video or a picture like a lot of the NFTs we're seeing today. I think there's going to be a lot more types of projects that we haven't seen come up. For example, I've been talking to a friend about making NFTs as like building blocks, where you can buy like kind of like Legos, where you can stack them into, you could buy one as its own NFT or stack them into a certain type of an arrangement and turn them into like one combinable NFT. So then it becomes this kind of currency / NFT
mosaic
synthesis. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just very excited about all this stuff and feel, so grateful to have the knowledge and perspective on it that I do.
That's awesome. We'll come back to NFTs in a little bit, but what Jake was just touching on, Max, has a lot to do with some of the themes that you've been touching on for years now. Your talk in Tulum a couple years ago was a lot about governance. Your book has a lot to do with economic systems. What are you seeing as some of like the broader trends, and what are some of your predictions? Where do you see us going?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. I was just going to say actually that I'm probably not as excited as the rest of the group about NFTs, and that's not to say there's anything wrong with them, but I feel like that there's an original kind of crypto vision, the vision of alternative governance systems, parallel systems, where we get this massive experimentation in how we organize ourselves and reorganize ourselves and reduce the cost of exit for systems we don't like, entering systems that we do, for anything from how we make decisions together with consensus mechanisms, to how we allocate resources within a community, say whether it be a commons or a market system. I love that diversity. I love how much that the original vision of decentralization was captured in that first wave of crypto, and then it happened, crypto winter. And I was listening back on the old tapes where we're sort of going, we're probably going to see a big crash, and everybody's going to get deflated, and we're going to enter into the trough of disillusionment. And sure enough, we did. And that was to be expected, just like it was expected with the internet, or it wasn't expected with the internet, but it was expected with crypto, because we had the experiment with the first wave of the internet and the trough of disillusionment after the 2000 bubble having burst. Looking forward, however, it's just a really interesting times. And I love the NFTs. I think it's really cool, but I wouldn't want these things to be distractions, as it were, from the original sense of mission that Satoshi brought with architecting alternative systems and saying basically fuck off to these massive collusion between the state and these entrenched industries. And I want that original vision to remain in place, and I want us to keep working despite sort of regulatory morass that has been placed in front of everyone, is particularly in the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. I mean, really the crypto movement, the original crypto movement, has moved so much to Asia, where I trust that it's in good hands. But I see a lot of, North America being sort of wrapped up in NFTs, and it's like, well, what the hell else are you going to do besides, the very limited few things, or if you can manage to get around all the firewalls and shit and deal in Asia. A lot of people can do that, but the mass appeal of crypto, the mass subversion that was possible, that has been muted, and I am concerned that we won't see a resurgence in that original energy, and the promise of cryptocurrencies could be limited, and that's my concern.
Jake?
Yeah, so I was just, Max, what you were saying made me think about Walter Benjamin's Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And he goes through how art was originally made as a representation for a cult. And then later art was produced for paintings to put in churches, and then eventually, so more people were able to see it. And then eventually we had the lithograph, and we had photography, and these started to allow art to be spread even further. And now and obviously the internet had a digital art component too before NFTs, but with NFTs today, we've really taken it to another level where we can spread a message globally using NFTs, and whatever the NFT is almost a message that can be instilled in people's minds, and that can resonate with a certain type of people. And I think that using those NFTs as like a ticket into a community, which then on the back end does all of the original mission of crypto, like a DAO, and with the community currency, et cetera. I think the NFT can kind of be the inspiration to bring the right people into it, so everybody has the same kind of feelings about the organization that they're parting to join.
Yeah, I would say it's a really cool way to onboard people to the idea of owning your data. Like, you really have to get in there and start using these things to appreciate it. Like with NFTs, you can create them on one marketplace, whether it's Rarible or whatever else, but then it gets automatically mirrored on OpenSea, which is basically like a giant NFT aggregator. So now, once you have these things, anyone anywhere in the world can create a marketplace or an art gallery or whatever and like curate what's on the blockchain. And once you start playing with that, you realize, wow, like you could own your data for anything, like your social media profile, anything you create online can be like a self-sovereign entity that can be translated. Like if you don't like Facebook's terms of service, you can take your whole profile and shift that to another venue. If you don't like the art gallery, you can shift it wherever. And people can also shift your stuff wherever, I guess. But yeah, once you start messing around in this world, you just start getting all kinds of ideas. And everyone that joins the NFT world, they're setting up a MetaMask wallet or whatever. They're learning about public, private keys. They're getting turned on to these ideas. So I feel like there's definitely a possibility for distraction, but the quicker we can onboard people onto this and hopefully teach them the open source, decentralized ideals, I think it's all leading to good things.
One critical thing about it is that it provides a way for a whole new class of people to make a living in crypto. Right now, crypto is largely dominated by programmers and FX traders, effectively. And, kind of, sort of, culturally, it's a bit of a wasteland. Same conversations over and over again, the same books get read, the same politics. It's a pretty static environment. I can't think of anything better than crypto than for half of the art world to just come and invade the space, set up shops, figure out what sells, and begin to bring an influx of new ideas and new perspective in, because we are stale. 10 years in, we're still running off the same core of ideas. And just, the idea of having 500,000 artists just come into town and set up shop, it turns us from what we are right now, which is like frontier mining towns filled with nerds with shovels, into something that begins to resemble like a community that has life and breathes and actually has some aesthetics, has a much broader range of intellectual influences, begins to grow some new kind of values. And, it's like, that something real is happening when the artists arrive in force. It's like, okay, we've built something worth playing with. Okay, right, it's finally at a standard where somebody other than a nerd can love it.
Well, and that really... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm really happy to see it.
And that speaks a lot to Max's background. He explained in the replay the event Voice and Exit that he used to host, which I really loved because it made sure that everyone came to the table. It wasn't just the economists or the politicians. There were dancers and artists and everyone involved, making it kind of, a fully fledged table rather than really niche and an echo chamber, which is what Vinay was just speaking to. So Max, what do you think? Is it an on-ramp? Are we getting distracted? Is this necessary?
I hope these guys are right. I really do. One of the things that I remember being with you guys in Tulum and talking about how there was what a beautiful event it was, because you had this really group of very left-brain people, which they're the coders and the mathematicians, the economists, the systems thinkers on the one hand, and then on the other you had folks that perhaps had been into psychedelics who were much more in the artist, the right brain folks. And what I want to know is who specifically is going to be the corpus callosum that unites the left and right brain in such a way that makes this a beautiful, holistic movement, and not just for geeks, for and by geeks, to the extent that sort of notion of self-sovereignty, where they have coded things for themselves that has been a little more difficult for onboarding people. Now we're getting kids into stuff like you guys are describing, where it might be, I get to own the original Shiba Inu image that Gary has right there. Yeah, and I actually own the original version of that or something. It is great, and then you get these artists who are suddenly having visibility and their work is being traded, this, that, and the other. I love it. I love the idea. I love that vision. I hope that it leads to a more systematic and holistic understanding of what is possible through crypto in general. And you guys are convincing me that perhaps it is.
Well, and that's touching on something that's near to my heart, in that we do have such a technical and developer focus so far, and believe me, like, let's focus on the devs. They're doing amazing work and they're changing the resources that are available to the planet. So super grateful for them. And I've been attending crypto conferences for almost 4 years now, and I can't really contribute in a hackathon. I have a hard time really conveying these concepts to some of the people in my previous world in like humanitarian work, because we're still so tech focused. Maybe a bunch of our psychedelic friends today watching this are going to be curious, what does this mean? Like, what are some of the broader implications outside of, Tesla making it an investment? And, now we have this thing that's interesting for artists. What are some of the other concepts that you guys are excited to see emerge in the next few years? What are some of the platforms that might develop, or some of the use cases?
Well, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and this mirrors ICOs in a way, is that whenever there's a new project, or whether it's a new crypto project, whether it's an NFT, something new is generated and sent into the market, the amount of money or the amount of value that exists is multiplied. For example, if you raise $10 million for an ICO, and now you have $10 million, and you have $10 million of ICO tokens. Now that might not be fully liquid all the way down, and there's some conditions to that, but in essence, you have two points of value that are both worth $10 million. So in a way, you've almost doubled the amount of value in existence. And I think with this NFTs and the amount of generation of new materials that's happening today, money is going to, value, I should say, is going to start moving at a pace that like is unfathomable in relation to traditional banking systems. And that the amount of new value being generated and that will move around will open so many new types of possibilities that just weren't possible because of the limitations of the velocity of capital moving in traditional finance.
For sure. This is something that Andreas Antonopoulos talks a lot about in terms of like we're trying to overlay a completely new system onto our traditional ideas of finance and working within those confines. Basically, Max, you talked about this in 2018.
About the
fact that we're using a much more powerful tool and we're still limiting it to what our brain can compute in terms of like what's possible financially.
If I did, I don't remember. Well, thank you for reminding me.
You brought up Marshall McLuhan and you talked about how our tools are going to shape us. I don't know if you were just raising your hand. If you want to take this in a different direction, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, I will, if you'll permit me. I'm really excited about the idea of what, I don't know if I've coined this, but I'm going to try. The idea of perception markets, okay? This is a slightly different from, I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Robin Hanson, and he has this, he developed these prediction markets. Prediction markets are very restricted in the terms of how they work, and you have Augur and systems like this. Robin Hanson was one of the innovators behind that intellectually, and those got turned into blockchain-based phenomena. I'm really excited about the idea of a lot of what happens these days in modern media, I feel like needs to be transformed. So we have our perceptions, our human perceptions of things are very distorted by virtue of modern media. And people's opinions are everywhere. And opinions are like assholes, therefore assholes are everywhere. The reason that I think we really need market discipline with what you might call the information space, or to improve our collective intelligence, is that there is very little cost to being wrong, or there's very little cost to holding a certain kind of view or worldview. And it would be wonderful if there were perception markets that allowed people to, now there's a but coming, and we can talk about the but later because I don't want to hog the microphone. But I really do like the idea that you can put a little bit of skin in the game in terms of what you think is true, okay? And that there be evidentiary standards employed in marketplaces that would allow the stock in some truth claim to go down or some perception to go down. And even some of the biggest organs of information out there, the New York Times or whatever, if there were markets in how people perceive their verity or the veracity of their claims, that is a good direction for the development of keeping people in check. There's no such thing as absolute capital T truth. We cannot stand outside ourselves in order to verify some truth claim, much less the screens that are mediating our lives, right? But we can, in a certain sense, place bets on something that is more or less likely to be true and have reputations rise and fall with many, many people putting skin in the game. And I do recognize, however, that there is a problem with that line of thinking. And I hope that some genius figures it out, completes it, a Mike Elias type, for example, that that we can solve the problem of what you might call the GameStop problem, where you can just continuously create an alternative reality where people bet on truth claims, not because they're true, but because they want it to be true. And that's the difficulty in that thinking. But I think at the end of the day, if your market's big enough and people are seeking truth enough, these kind of markets could work.
Wow, investment in truthiness through reputation. Vinay, you were nodding. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of where we are right now, I want to suggest that Satoshi's original vision is actually kind of garbage, right? Like, for that to work, basically the nation state has to die as it currently exists, because all of the trade is being done in anonymous crypto tokens, so you starve it of taxation and it implodes. You know, that's the Satoshi vision. That's what Bitcoin is meant to do. That is the crypto-anarchist perspective on humanity. And to me, that is kind of like the iconoclastic Johnny Rotten punk rock moment where, you know, somebody goes on national TV in the 1970s in, you know, flossy red trousers, knocks over a table and, you know, calls the Pope a bastard or whatever it was that they did in the 70s, right? You know, so we have the iconoclastic moment. And then what happens is that the ideas diffuse into the rest of society and transform as they go. You know, you start there, then you wind up with the offspring, then you wind up with like, hey, it's okay to have kind of weird spiky hair at work and nobody cares to wear black leather jeans. You know, it's kind of, you know, the mass of society is infused with these very, very extreme ideas, and then they percolate through into general social progress. And all of the OGs are just like, oh, they threw away all of our vision. Everything we believed in, it's gone. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is now 5% more like your vision of the future than it was before, and everybody else thinks you won. So, you know, I think that there's a real dynamic over time where the early movers always perceive their movement to fail at the same time as everybody else perceives their movement to have succeeded. Oh, but we wanted so much more. And everybody else is like, yeah, well, you got all this. What are you complaining about? And that's where I kind of feel crypto is, that we're in another one of these dilution events. I mean, I talked about this. I did a talk called How to Sell Ideas at DevCon 0 for the Ethereum team in 2014. It's still on the internet. How to sell ideas. Basically, it says every time the number of people using your stuff goes up by a factor of 100, you get a total cultural transformation because nobody knows what the old story was. They make up their own story. So I sit on, what do you call that thing? Clubhouse, right? And you see these enormous rooms of Black entrepreneurs in the music business making plans for crypto and NFTs to be integral parts of their new business models, right? I don't know if they've ever read the Bitcoin white paper. They've got no allegiance to libertarian politics. They're completely uninterested in the dialogues that we've had for 20 years about security and privacy and crypto and all the rest of that stuff. You know, for them, it's just like, my God, I have a new hammer and I'm going to build a house, right? And is that success or failure, right? I mean, you know, these folks have absolutely no interest in our story about what crypto is. For them, it is 100% an economic way of making a living. And you know, they're all about a vision of the future. It's not just prosperity gospel, we're going to get dollar rich. They really believe in Bitcoin, but they do it in their own way inside of a totally new generation of crypto culture. And you know, I don't, how do I say this? Both sides are right? The old timers who are like, oh my God, this is dilution, you are correct. The new folks who are just like, my God, this is mass adoption, you are also correct. You know? Nobody, you know, it's not that there's a right or wrong answer. It's just this is how the cookie crumbles. And I really did not think that we were going to see this happening around NFTs or around crypto at all. I mean, I really thought that we'd stalled out on cryptocurrency as a concept. And it just turns out that culture metabolizes these vital nutrients in its own way, not the way we anticipate.
That's fascinating. I love the punk rock analogy. That it's true in so many ways. You end up with anything that goes mainstream. It doesn't feel like it did in the very early stages, and the people that were the early movers are always sad that they got co-opted. But that was totally the point for crypto. We were trying to get this message spread. What do you think, Gary? Oh, Vinay, take it.
No, it's sweet. I was just going to say, like, you know, the revolution, unless you have like a total, like, you know, if the US wound up with hyperinflation and then went bankrupt, you could see the Satoshi vision play out exactly. I would rather not see the world go through that. Anyway,
That's
sorry.
that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. I mean, in that scenario, you're right. Anyway, sorry, let me pass the ball. I apologize.
I think it's of paramount importance not to lose sight of those original values and principles of openness and decentralization, because all these technologies can definitely be used by, you see China racing to create a blockchain-based currency so they can track every citizen, and then using the social credit program, once you have perfect tracking and tracing, they're already limiting people's ability to travel and fly and get a bank account and this and that. So if a lot of people get onboarded without this knowledge, then a government's like, oh, here, this currency or platform it's way faster and better, and they're not like, oh, the Ethereum network is really clogged up. Let's just shift to this other thing that's closed and centralized because it might work a bit better in the short term. So I think it's very important that we communicate that to as many people as possible. But also, I don't think most people really pay attention or care. So I think it's all about building as fast as we can and inspiring the people who can be inspired and having them as this core creative group. And also, for sure, imbuing the whole thing with Dojely values. So it's not just some rebellious crypto anarchist thing. If you can put a fun face on it and make it a good time for everybody, then I think it's a lot more powerful and subversive. Like, what government would ever crack down on such a beautiful Doge? So yeah, I think it's definitely good to keep these ideas alive. And I'm not in favor of like burning or smashing anything down or overthrowing the system. I think it's all about overgrowing the system, or as, I don't know if it's your quote, Max, criticize by creating. Because I think the rebellious thing turns people off.
I'm into underthrow. I love the term underthrow. It sounds like undertow. It pulls you from beneath, from the bottom up. But there is a massive collusion between entrenched industries and the state right now. There is a massive power that the central banks are exerting. There is debt in my country. We have surpassed debt as a percentage of GDP. It is just the unfunded liabilities for government spending is astronomical, to the point that the play in the amount of prediction between just how much is more than the entire economic output of the United States. It's just stunning how much debt we're taking on as a people, as a country, and other countries are doing it too. And it's just, which country's going to hit the gas more? And I have a sense of urgency around that because I have kids, and my kids are going to inherit some of this garbage, either hyperinflation or just, the idea that you can tax your way out of it, which suppresses other, economic means of coming out of such a terrible collapse. I am very worried about it. I mean, that's the basically the idea behind my latest book, and I'm not trying to.
It's very reasonable. It's a very reasonable worry. I mean, that is not an unrealistic fear. It's a shit show.
I think I think that it's almost bound to happen in some way, hyperinflation over the next, sometime in the next 10 years. And, what Vinay was talking about, his kind of Clubhouse, talking about Clubhouse having these entrepreneurs who are, without really understanding the core stuff of crypto, still designing their own value systems. I think the importance of that is huge, because somebody's born into a country and using fiat currency their whole life. It's kind of like you're almost like a victim to that economy in some way, and whatever was there before is just what you have to take on. But in now, you know, in the line of what Vinay was saying, it's like anybody can go in, create their own social currency, define their own system of value, start offering products that for that currency, and start to generate these microeconomies, and only participate in the networks that actually matter to them. And I think that that's where we'll really, it's sort of the denationalization of money kind of position in a lot of ways, where we move from, you know, these large national currencies into more, you know, tens, hundreds of thousands or millions of currencies, where everybody's just participating in the ones that matter to them.
That's beautiful too. And if people either sort of unwittingly embrace the alternative infrastructure for this when the shit hits the fan, then by virtue of whatever means, without fully comprehending what they've actually done in the process, great. And you know, I am generally an optimist, and so my short and medium term vision is, or my short and medium term outlook is somewhat pessimistic, but in my long range vision is optimistic. I wonder if you guys are sort of feeling that way too with everything that's going on.
I'm overwhelmingly relieved. I mean, this COVID thing could have been 10 or 20 times worse than it has been. I think we have absolutely dodged a bullet here. And at that point, I have rose-tinted glasses pretty seriously strapped on my face right now. It's going to be a few years before I can be depressed again. You know, it's not, you know, I'm not saying this is automatic good fortune, but it's hard for me to feel like this is a bad year. You know, the vaccines are on the way. The dying will stop relatively soon. I think there's a decent chance we're not going to see too much problem with mutant strains. You know, this is not to say that we don't have a ton of other problems that have been revealed there, and you know, there is all of that. But I think that we have gotten real lucky in a situation that could have left our society in ruins. And then we have to keep on keeping on.
I think that the economic implications of this year are going to last for, you know, at least 5-10 years, and we haven't even started to see some of the real pain in a lot of industries. I mean, I think commercial real estate is a prime example, where, you know, all these buildings are just empty now, and everybody's just kind of like, who's going to go back to Manhattan and spend $20 million on some office space when everything is working just fine? You know, I was in the city not too long ago, and I'm driving down the street, and I see like bank, drugstore, bank, and I'm like, none of this needs to exist. Like office building, banks, it's like, this is all just space that it doesn't need to be here. And like, it'll be interesting to see how some of these spaces can be converted into more like hubs for creatives, for communities, for fun. Because all the banking stuff, you know, we don't need square footage.
Definitely.
We're seeing something. Sorry, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting year to see us kicked into this light speed decentralization of working from home and doing everything from home and virtually. But definitely short term, yeah, it's been, when the pandemic was starting, I think a lot of us thought this could be this incredibly unifying event where it's like humanity against this thing. But it's crazy to see the amount of like polarization and arguing that came out of it, and just the amount of polarization within. Seems like every level of society over the last few years, especially. So I think that's been a disappointment. And also just seeing like so many, it hasn't really affected me much, but seeing so many restaurants and small businesses shut down. I mean, even if we get a vaccine, we get this pandemic sorted out, like who's going to want to like start a small business or a restaurant or anything, knowing it can be arbitrarily shut down at any moment. So I think it's creating a lot of pressure for us to decentralize more into communities where we align with the visions and values of the other people around us, and it's not about voting to impose our will on the other group every few years. It's like, let's really shift, and you can work virtually. And with all these decentralized systems, we can still be networked together, but living side by side with people that you don't agree with. I think we got to get beyond that, because I really don't see. It seems like things are going to get more polarized in the short term, at least, as far as I can tell. So it's a big thing on my mind a lot, for sure.
I think Starlink is really going to help us here.
Yes.
You know, right? You know, like, one of the reasons it's hard to live in rural America is it's hard to get enough internet to work. You know, and if Starlink is as good as the early reports are, if you've got 300 megabits to orbit and a chat client which is optimized to use satellite bandwidth efficiently and deal with latency, you know, because like there's a huge amount of room for just architecting the chat programs that run over Starlink to really, really not then do a big run over to an Amazon data center and back and all that. You know, you could really tighten it up for that hardware architecture. And at that point, small town America becomes completely habitable for anybody can work from anywhere if they've got a remote job. And the size of the...
Will you explain Starlink really quickly?
Elon Musk is clearly the pharaoh of the new age and should be worshipped as a god, maybe something like that. I think that's the essence of it. But I mean, basically, they're just going to launch enormous numbers of tiny little satellites that are more or less space-based 5G towers, right? And you just clog the sky with these space-based 5G towers, and you get fast internet wherever you happen to be. And they've got, I don't know how many satellites are up now, maybe 600 or something. They're going to put up 10,000 of the damn things, maybe 20,000 of them. The more satellites you have, the more bandwidth there is to share. And the satellites will either fall out of the atmosphere or they'll hoist them back up again with little robot tugs. It's a pretty, you know what, you really know you're in the 21st century, that it is real and that it works. But the underlying principle is more or less cell phone masts in space. It's not rocket surgery apart from the in-space part. Yeah, sure. Go.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to be next.
Yeah. Sorry.
Vinay, you're into this too, to some degree, and so I'm interested in your opinion. But yours in particular, and I know you're running the show here. But given you're interested in humanitarian efforts, I would like to hear both of you guys' opinion on how things like Starlink, which gives internet accessibility to really rural areas, but also the developing world, and some of that is the promise that at least Musk himself said Starlink offers. Are you guys hopeful about both the marriage of Starlink in terms of bandwidth accessibility anywhere on the planet, plus the promise of cryptocurrency and decentralization in general, that these things convergence would help the least advantaged in the world?
Vinay, you want to start?
Take it away. I mean, you know what I'm going to say. It's going to be awesome.
Personally, I'm a little concerned at the moment with the way that people are being introduced to the internet in a lot of developing regions. There was a purportedly beneficial program that Facebook rolled out where they put a lot of different satellites, and they gave a lot of areas that didn't have access, and that looks great. The way that they did that meant that Facebook was native on all of the phones that were used, and now people think that the internet is Facebook. They don't actually understand that there's a whole bunch of different platforms, because they're accessing everything through that portal, similar to what a lot of people do with Google when you actually Google Yahoo or something, like they're using it as the gateway. And what that has resulted in is a lot of really skewed perceptions on, all of the things that we can go down, that all of the social dilemmas and the great hacks and everything have addressed in terms of what happens when your online presence is being dictated by a platform that has an agenda that is not neutral. So my questions have a lot to do with, how people in those regions are still going to access this, who's paying for it, because just because they're there doesn't mean that it's free, and whose agenda is actually helping to introduce some of these ideals. I really love cryptocurrencies, and I would love to see more decentralized technology introduced to developing economies, and that's still my agenda. That is my libertarianism saying, this is how I want people to be introduced to resources, because I think that they will be more free this way. I still know that that's my bias speaking. So there's a lot to that. And Vinay, I'll let you jump in.
That is an angle that I had not properly factored in. I remember having a bit of a worry about this a few years ago and just saying, it'll be fine. But I mean, will it? Having seen what essentially cable television managed to do to America in the last 4 years, it's maybe not inconceivable that you could see some real issues if you wind up with a lot of bandwidth and then a bunch of jerks. I remember joking many years ago about, what would happen if Scientology launched a free mobile phone network in Africa.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, right. So, I think that we here have to, will there be disasters? There will be disasters. Will it overall be positive? I don't see how it couldn't be. But I mean, the thing here is that if you wind up with fettered access to the mind, you wind up with very insidious systems of control, right? So, we can see the opportunity for, telco providers to filter the internet. We can see the possibility that satellite providers will be forced to filter the internet, either by the national governments or by the International Telecommunications Union or by the federal government. There are lots of places where pressure could be applied, but we don't have to solve everything at once. Like, I feel like there's an ongoing thing where, like, everything right now is a mixture of good things and bad things, and we keep hoping the new technology that comes will be only good things. Solar panels are pretty close to only good. I haven't yet seen a downside for solar panels. Maybe there are a few minor ones, like waste from solar panels, right? Something like Starlink, it's a lot of impact, and some of that impact will be good and some of it will be bad, and we can lobby for it to be more good than bad. But I think that this is one of those things where, if we look for something that has no problematic side effects, we wind up with no technology. And that isn't a way of giving corporate interests a kind of free pass. But in terms of how we get out of the global hole that we're in, I am sort of willing to put pedal to metal here and just go for as much change as possible, as quickly as possible, because I would rather have a new set of problems than the problems we have now. If that makes sense. Like, we're in a super bad neighborhood, and maybe we do just step on the gas and get the heck out of here and then pick it up once we're in a nicer place. Get the solar panels there, get the satellite there. If there is a bunch of coercive crap from Facebook, we can deal with those bozos later on, but let's get the kids access to YouTube first. Maybe. I want to swing us around to something else that came up on the chat, which is very similar, which is patenting of psychedelics. So if we want to talk about attaching corporate agendas to access to information, how much more concerning is it to attach corporate agendas to access to states of being?
And the mainstream movement of something that started out as anti-mainstream.
And, here we have this thing of when I was in the States, I went back in 2018 and then I was back again beginning of 2020 before the pandemic really kicked in. The things which are happening in American psychedelic culture, I was completely disoriented. I remember meeting Dublin and the guys 99, 2000, way back in the day when MAPS was some weird fringe group. And now it's just we're going to decriminalize psychedelics in entire states. And I'm just are you people crazy? Do you have any idea what will happen? But no, this is what we're doing. So to me, I feel like I'm completely disoriented by the speed of change in American policy on psychedelics. I don't understand the culture. I have no idea what the trade-offs are. I am lost in this space.
I highly recommend reading a book by Dr. Carl Hart called Drug Use for Grown-Ups. Dr. Carl Hart is a tenured professor at Columbia who has been studying administering drugs across the spectrum, from weed to PCP to people for 20, 30 years. And he talks about how we've been conditioned to have such a negative outlook on everything as it relates to drugs. And in Western society, for some reason, just like pleasure in general, it's like if I feel good, it's like I'm doing something wrong, and I need to like not do that. But he makes this case for all drugs being completely legal, and I can really get behind that vision and how much it could keep people out of prisons, not require people to be nonviolent offenders to live the free lives that they deserve, and more. And I think as it relates to the IP stuff and patenting, I really hope that there's optimism. And yes, free Ross. Thank you, Camille. One day. As it relates to the IP part, I hope that we'll be able to get to a point where if you want to utilize somebody's patented technology, you can just like tap into it for a license and use it for a small fee. And I think NFTs have the potential to do that, where like you can just say, hey, we're going to use this, but we can automatically just send you a cut of whatever profits we make from producing this product. That's my kind of like optimistic hope of where it could go. But if it ends up in this kind of how IP's gone so far, that's not such a good situation.
I think there's a big picture for the whole event, and I'd love to just point it out for a moment, and that is that psychedelics and cryptocurrencies are crypto technologies writ large are both enormously powerful tools, human tools. Okay, and the way you dealt, the way the ancients in their wisdom, which is so easy and we so frequently forget in this day and age, the way the wisdom traditions dealt with power is to circumscribe the sacred, and that's to try to develop some difference between the sacred and the profane. And I think for both cryptocurrency technologies, we want to sacralize to some degree the power of these technologies and keep our sense of perspective and mission on them, so we don't repeat something like we had last time, which is what amounted to crypto winter, where people were just throwing gobs of money at every ICO that came across the screen. They were trying to get rich, and it was about greed. And I am a hyper-capitalist, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I think this is your greed becomes problematic because it's not matched with wisdom. The same with psychedelics. I mean, there are therapeutic settings. There are reason that there are people who are shaman in some of these traditions that have used these plant medicines for years. And it's not to say that you shouldn't use them in a non-therapeutic setting or in a non-spiritual setting. Certainly I have. Wait a minute, it's the NSA watching anyway. I think some of us here certainly have. But to deal with them with maturity and wisdom, circumspection, and to recognize the boundary of the sacred and the profane, at least to some degree, will allow us to develop cultural norms around these powers that allow us to not see them as in their basest and most damaging way, but to see them in a way that is going to be the most fruitful for human flourishing. That is my hope.
Vinay, what happens when we have broad pop culture adoption of psychedelics?
Oh God. I mean, we used to talk about this as the frat boys with vials of LSD problem. Like, you're just going to have a whole new class of trouble if you're in a position where, somebody can go down to the liquor store and walk out with a gram of LSD for $150. right? So whatever we're doing, I don't think that is a sane and rational outcome. Right? Tim Leary's perspective 50 years ago now, 60 years ago now, was that we ought to license the stuff like we license activities like parachute jumping. So you go to the parachute jumping center and they have a licensed instructor and it's a safe environment, and you can do it recreationally or you can do it because you want the training. But the whole thing is, licensed, mandated, managed. I kind of prefer that model to the medicalization model. I think the medicalization model, yes, therapeutic use is extremely important, but if we say that you have to be sick before you can take drugs, this is going to leave us with a whole new generation of cultural problems down the line. But I have a real, oh God, this sounds so bad. I was part of a big psychedelic community in the 1990s, like big, hundreds of people. And I got to tell you, I do not like how we aged, right? I think there was way more mental illness in that community than I would have expected. There was way more failure to thrive. There are a lot of people that were very bright and very capable and just never quite pulled their lives together. And I would say that I fit that demographic too. Like I've had moments where I felt I was living up to my potential, but I've also had years where I just wandered around not able to really get traction on things. So, I want to really be cautious that we are forming a kind of psychedelic utopianism. And I think that with 5 or 10 years of mass use of psychedelics, particularly by people that aren't particularly well prepared, we are going to be unhappy with the results.
Is it similar to Americans drinking versus Europeans? Is there something about the, the regulation and the keeping it away from us? Do you think that could lead to irresponsible behavior?
I don't think it's just irresponsible behavior. I think the substances and the states of being are inherently kind of dangerous. And they're certainly treated as being kind of dangerous by all the traditional cultures. Right? Everybody takes this stuff super seriously. The precautions around heavy psychedelic use in most cultures are similar to the precautions that we take around things like operating theaters and sterile surgery. They really roll out the A game. Highly trained practitioners, specific place and time, extremely tight procedures, the whole framework in which the activity is done in most cultures, the closest equivalent we have is medical settings. And I mean like operating theaters, not counseling. So the fact that the traditional cultures take it that seriously and have that intense risk management culture around it, I think is excellent evidence for the idea that these things are kind of inherently dangerous, right? And the balance here is cars are inherently dangerous, and then we live with the risk that cars present because the benefit to society of having vehicles is so large. Life is unimaginable without cars. So I think that I'm an old fart on this stuff, right? Like, oh, well, back in my day, yes, this is the traditional position of the middle-aged. I acknowledge that I'm taking the traditional position of the middle-aged. That said, let me do my job and be the middle-aged. We're just not really able to build the risk management structures that traditional societies have because we haven't burned our fingers badly enough yet. Right. But I'm wincing as I watch this enormous ramping up of this culture of just like, hey, the drugs are our friends. Like, yet nobody where this thing came from treated it that way. I don't think that's going to go so well, white boys. So how do we build this kind of, circumspect and respectful? And this is not just the kind of notion of the sacred. It's the notion of the sacred that will bite your damn face off. And that, I just don't know how to square that with the kind of psychedelic movement vibe that is kind of ramping up in America. And I think maybe that's a phase that it just has to go through. And, I pity the casualties, but I don't really have the power to do much about it other than say like, maybe.
Jake, has Pandora's box been opened? Is it too late to go back to treating this quite so carefully? And now we just hope that we have responsible microdosing and mainstream adoption? What do you think?
Well, I think depending on where people are coming from in their own lives. Well, I guess I'll first say on Vinay's note, the psyche is a very fragile thing, and there can be serious problems when substances are consumed in the wrong way, that have damaging effects over the course of the rest of somebody's life. And I think, trying to provide as much education as possible, really making sure people are as informed as they can be, is critical. What exact form that takes, I don't know. I think the hospital kind of route is too sterile. The all out, Burning Man free for all is great for experienced people who know what they're doing. But there's just especially for people who have never used a substance before and are just interested. And so with so much misinformation out there, and who even knows what quality of things they're getting or how much they should take, it's there does need to be some sort of guide to facilitate people along their journeys. But that said, I mean, kids have been experiencing with drugs since, while they were illegal, and, it turned out fine for a lot of people. So, and that's, so I'm kind of two minds in that regard. It's I think people should be able to do whatever they want. And if you want an education, and people should be able to do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting somebody else. That's,
I've got some thoughts on this whole thing as well. It's definitely been very interesting doing these parties in public. And although I'm dressed kind of funny, I'm definitely not a big drug guy. And these parties have always been promoted as sober, conscious, mindful events, decentralized dance parties with the boom boxes behind me, if people are wondering. I don't know if it's Alan Watts. One of my favorite quotes on drugs or psychedelics was, "Once you got the message, hang up the phone." I've definitely seen tons of friends over the years just doing way too much, going way too far, and all kinds of permanent damage and mental damage. And I think a lot of this is just the result of when you control a substance, whether it's alcohol or whatever. Party culture growing up, small town Canada was just every weekend, how can you get a hold of alcohol and hide out and drink it as quick as you can? And drugs were just whatever, totally rebellious culture. So I think it's definitely all about transitioning into a new culture of freedom where this stuff is actually respected and revered along with each other. And going back to the whole Starlink thing, one of the most inspiring, heartening moments for me in recent years was when Elon Musk open sourced all or most of the patents for Tesla. He said, this technology is way too important for the world. It's my shareholders wouldn't have let me do this, but I'm in charge, so I'm making it happen. So having people like that leading by example, and hopefully that's kind of the ethos that's going to underlie what will be happening with Starlink and just access to everyone. And also going back to the intellectual property ownership monetization of psychedelics. I think I've been doing a talk this year a lot called Scaling Spirituality from Ecosystems to Ecosystems, where an ecosystem would be closed, centralized, hierarchical, something that prioritizes yourself above your community. And patents made a lot of sense. Intellectual property made a lot of sense for the last few hundred years before the dawning of the internet and the open source movement. But I think now it's not a left or right thing. It's basically, are you working towards a life that's closed and centralized or open and decentralized? And as a filmmaker, creative person for a long time, I've always hated copyrights and patents and anything that held me back from being able to share music or use music in my movies. And everything I do, I want it to be released, completely open sourced, completely available to anyone in humanity to build upon and share. And it's awesome to see cryptocurrencies and everything else being open, and you see the rapid acceleration of it, and it functions like an actual ecosystem. It's not just these lockdown silos that are regulated and enforced by governments. And getting a phone call. But yeah, within this talk, Scaling Spirituality, it looks at like what is the nature of these ecosystems and ecosystems. And there's a really good quote from Michael Pollan where he talks about, what's the quote? He says, the opposite of ego is spirituality. That quote really struck me. So if the opposite of an ecosystem is a spiritual system, and an ecosystem is an open and decentralized system, then to me, this egoless aspiration and expression, like to me, that's true spirituality, like pure, perfect self-expression. And when you're expressing purely without self-interest and you connect with people, like I think that is the ultimate thing that we're all striving to get to. But we're stuck in these systems where it's impossible for a lot of reasons to have these connections happen. So I think all these things together, and I think psychedelics have the ability for some people to unlock the less egoed self and this sense of connection. But yeah, it can't be just this crazy, like hyper capitalist rampage where everyone's just taking all these drugs, but they're still locked in these systems and mindsets. So I think all these things together, we're getting somewhere, but we got to have the right values behind it. And that's actually where the Doge comes in as well. Like it's just this Doge spelled backwards is e-God or ego-D, and it's just this perfect, in my opinion, beneficent divine avatar that just continues to inspire silliness and goodwill and community. And I think it's the perfect figurehead inspiration for this whole movement. And it's exciting to see, like every day Elon Musk is tweeting like he's all about the Doge, and like yesterday he finally tweeted Doge spelled backwards is e-God. So we're headed towards a singularity of a lot of good things that's going to be way more hilarious and fun than anyone expected.
Legal tender on Mars, baby. Legal tender on Mars. You could pay for your ticket in Doge.
It's true. I actually have some far out friends. They're working on creating an NFT for a program to get to space to party on the moon. The Doge will feature prominently.
Crazy infeasible. I mean, that's like a 10, 15-year goal. People have mortgages for 30 years. Don't tell me it's crazy to plan a party on the moon.
Not at all.
Yeah. I mean, we forget, like a 30-year mortgage, that's a totally routine document. It's a bet on 30 years of conditions in the future. Nobody thinks you're crazy for making a 30-year bet on a mortgage with a linear model. But if you make a 30-year bet on anything exponential, everybody thinks you're insane.
Put it
What
all
was
in
Richard
Doge.
Branson charging for people to go to the moon? It was not that high of a ticket price.
It was like 250,000.
Something like that. Might be, yeah. I mean, like,
And we're talking about
cryptonauts, right?
we
It's
didn't even
just
have
a few
an
million
iPhone.
Doge right now.
Yeah, I mean, you
Cost
wonder
like
how many
$50 a few years ago.
Right. How many people in crypto could, actually afford a trip to space if they wanted to, right? That'd be crazy. Yeah, real interesting times.
What's something for people to look forward to as we wrap up today? What is something that you are optimistic about, Max? I know that in the short term, we have some bumps ahead and probably some more collapse before we get back on our feet. But what's something that you're heartened by these days?
Well, that was the new book. I called it After Collapse because I'm heartened by what comes next. And I think it goes back to the question of decentralized governance. I think it's going to create a situation in which we find ourselves having to radically experiment, not because we want to, because we'll have to. And so what comes afterwards, if we have enough of the infrastructure in place, and enough of this way of seeing things not in such binary terms, which politics tends to engender in us as being either or scenarios, either this party or that, either we think this in this ideological frame or that. Rather, we see this pluralism of communities and pluralism of systems that's possible to enter into and experiment with. And this grand experimentation will have losses, it will have failures. But the upside of that, the beautiful part of it, is that some really good systems are going to emerge, and we're going to be able to exit and enter new systems and new communities much more readily than we are now. That's what's exciting to me.
I love it. Vinay, what are you optimistic about?
So, I still have the relief feeling of just like the rose-tinted glasses of just, the COVID bullet has just embedded itself in the wall safely over our heads. So I sort of feel like we might get a little bit of a grace period culturally where people are not quite ready to go back to the way things were. Like we weren't really having that good a time. I don't see why we should actually move back to the city, why I'm going to go back to commuting, why I'm going to do, are we really going to send the kids back to school? I don't know what the lifestyle changes are that people make or what the cultural changes will be, but I feel like there's a decent chance that some of the ills of the old world will be just mysteriously gone and not come back. So I'm hopeful for a period of fairly substantial cultural progress post-COVID, at least in the coastal cities in the States and in Europe, bits of the rest of the world. Not so much in the places where they're not too keen on the vaccine thing. That's going to be a problem. And then the other thing is, we're much further in the future than we think we are. This rocket thing, the Mars mission, all the rest of that, he's going to do an ICO for the Mars mission. He's going to do that. Right? How else is he going to raise that much money? No, seriously, it's exactly the kind of thing that might happen, because at least then it's not a security. Right? So I sort of feel like these kind of large scale, mega project, remember 1960s where everything happened in terms of hardware at the same time? Supersonic planes and color television. It was just like a decade of just bam, 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 right? Vaccines that take 2 days to prepare, and now we can go around and figure out how to do a whole bunch of new vaccines because we've got this mRNA vaccine stuff. Woohoo, right? The new Macs, oh my God, right? I've never had an experience of opening up a new computer that was the cheapest black laptop they sell and having it be like a religious experience in terms of functionality. It's a machine that moves at the speed of thought. I've never had a computer that did that, not since I was using green screens. They moved at the speed of thought, right? So, then we've got all the Mars stuff, right? And we've got Starlink. And so it just looks to me like we've got a decade of just boom, 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 in the fundamental heavy engineering, hardcore technical based stuff that is then epoch defining. So I think that we're about to go through a real period of technological acceleration, disorientation, cultural reassessment. I don't think we've seen a period where we had so much discontinuous technological progress racked up. And by the end of the decade, solar panels will be less than a quarter of the price they are now, right? Could be 10% of the price. So, this is going to be a good one. I am glad I am here to see this.
I have a friend named Sunny Agarwal in the crypto space who talks about how we have these kind of fits and lulls of innovation. And he was predicting in February of last year that it was going to take maybe the climate crisis or some sort of war, as we've seen historically, to push us back into another fit of innovation. And speaking to what you just witnessed over the last year, we just got kicked up again. Mm-hmm. Gary, what are you optimistic about? What can people look forward to?
Yeah, I think we're really starting to see all these technologies unlocking all sorts of possibility. We didn't really get into it, but with the whole tokenization thing, it's amazing too, because it's not just art. Any piece of infrastructure anywhere in the world, a road or a bridge or someone's education, no matter where they are in the world, anyone, anywhere can instantly invest or donate to help uplift people. We don't have to keep relying on these giant monolithic centralized governments and aid structures to try and improve the world. We're going to have direct connection, and now Starlink link to actually get that into even the most remote areas. And definitely, it's very great to see. Nothing I think makes me happier than seeing Elon on board with the Doge, because I think him promoting Dogely values and Doge consciousness worldwide like that is just light years ahead. Will advance in moments.
That's awesome. Jake, what's good? What are we looking forward to?
Buckminster Fuller talked about how we're moving towards a world of total unemployment. And I think that there has been a lot of lives that have been formed or lived in a particular format due to societal form, culture, what people are told they're supposed to be, and having these full-time jobs that maybe people don't actually want to be doing, but think they have to be doing because that's how, what you do in life and how you survive. And I think that, which is true in that model. And I think that the optimistic side of what some of these technologies can provide today, enable people to not have to take on these jobs that they might not want to be doing and really focus their energy on the things that they love doing, and still be rewarded or still be compensated fairly in a way that is able to sustain themselves. For me, I think that's an optimal situation. If every human being can be doing exactly what they want to be doing and be and allow the energy of that work to support themselves, I think that would be fantastic, and I think that we're on the way there.
That gives me goosebumps. I love that. Mine is a little bit of a grouping of all of yours, actually. I'm really excited. I think to Vinay's point, we've just gotten a massive shakeup, and we've just seen so many of our values and the things that we thought were fixed in terms of regulation, and everything just got erased so quickly that maybe we're starting to rethink, like, how do we want these communities to come together? To Max's point, you said something early in the pandemic about how we've outsourced care for one another. And one of the things that happened really early in lockdown was people were taking it back and saying, I'm going to go grocery shopping for my vulnerable neighbor, or pick up the prescription for my elderly grandfather, or, like any of these things that we used to just kind of let people handle on their own. All of a sudden, we were bringing back in terms of community. And I think we're starting to see, I don't need to commute an hour every day. I can actually reach out to the people, and it feels good to care about my community. Some of the things we had forgotten and we lost them. And I hope that we bring them back in and remember them rather than be divided. Gary, as you mentioned, that we have seen divisiveness. And I hope that we remember that with the playfulness that you bring with us. There's so much that we can move forward now thinking about how we want communities to be focused and how we want to build them, rather than just feeling like they have to be this way because it's how it's always been. We've just seen it doesn't have to be how it's always been. So decentralized technology, all sorts of wonderful, mind-blowing modalities, ways to come together. I think that's going to wrap it for us. So I'm going to invite our friend Mike back in to join us for the end of the session, and just say thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening to us.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you for, this is so great to just watch you not only reflect on everything we did together 3 years ago in Tulum, but everything that's evolved since then. I got a lot out of, I would love to actually just to echo and maybe underscore a few things that I drew out of this conversation. I mean, for one thing, just hearing the latest in the crypto space, things like NFTs, it's getting me thinking a lot about we're thinking about this question of what do crypto and psychedelic have to do with each other? That was the initial exploration 3 years ago. And I'm thinking about ways maybe of incorporating NFTs. So stay tuned for that. I'm working it out still, but I'm learning myself a lot, like what's the potential here? But also in general, there's so many ways that I saw in this conversation, right, that our communities, the crypto and the psychedelic communities, are really mirrors for each other in so many ways. And it's very interesting seeing both in terms of value sets, but also in terms of challenges. So I think the values of open sourcing, of course, in the crypto space, and then what we're talking about with IP, like these are really relevant themes that cross both of the realms here. And we're talking about communities. And at the same time, I love the comments, Vinay, that you were making about how what the original activists wanted. It's not, when it gets mainstreamed, it's not exactly what you thought. And just what's happening with crypto, it's also happening with psychedelics, So there's a lot of really interesting mirrorings that I'm seeing, and also a lot of potential that I'm also seeing of ways that these two communities, these two movements, industries now, I guess, right, can really can inform each other. And I'm excited to really continue that because there is more. We actually have 2 more panels that from the original conference in Tulum that we will be premiering. And so stay tuned for that. If you are on this event, you're going to be given the information about where to do that. And we'll have another live panel. And so that'll be on April 11th. We're going to bring back more of the speakers from the original conference. And we're really going to start, the 2 events to date, we really were setting the stage, right, about what's going on in psychedelics, what's going on in crypto, with a little bit of each theme spiced into the rest. But now we're going to start really diving into what are the cross-pollinations as we kind of move forward in this series. With that, I really appreciate all of your thoughts. We're going to actually have more today. If you want to continue, folks watching, hanging out on the virtual Ozo Beach, the green button below is how you get there. I'm going to go there. Maybe some of you that are here with us today will come hang out a little bit more on the Ozo virtual beaches. But yeah, this has been a pleasure. Thank you all for coming back and having this jam.
Thank you so much, Mike, for setting this up.
Fantastic.
Really fun. Really fun.
Thanks for all your hard work. This video is going to be posted somewhere.
Oh yeah, well, so it'll be available for replay right here in the Crowdcast, and it will also go on YouTube. So this video will be available all the places to replay. And I think it'll be a good reference point. There's a lot of good juice in there. I might have to watch it again myself.
And thank you everyone who joined us today. We had a great crowd.
Yeah, thank you everybody. And see you on the virtual beach, and we'll see you for more Crypto Psychedelic. May the force be with you all.